Hello and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for July 31st, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about, and it is episode 224, and I have the very great pleasure of having back on the show Martin Armstrong of Armstrong Economics and Princeton Economics. He's I had the great pleasure of meeting Martin recently up in Calgary in person. We had a lovely time up there. So Martin, it's good to see you, and we haven't talked since Calgary. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Just watching the world go crazy.
Exactly. I said, as we said before we started, I said to you before we started talking this, before we hit record, I said, I'm only sleeping about 3 or 4 hours a night right now. I was sleeping like a baby for a while, and now in the last week or so, it's like, not really. So, I know you've been, I know you put out a note about a week and a half ago, about 2 weeks ago, which is part of the reason why you're here today, because your staff reached out to me to have you on the show, and I said, of course. But I also know that you've been out and about talking about what you've been hearing behind the scenes, the scuttlebutt about what NATO's planning and all of that. And I want to make sure that we set that as the groundwork before we get into what we think are the nitty gritty of what this is all happening. But what's the big, the inciting incident that's over the horizon, effectively, or just over the horizon? So
I think that it's becoming more and more obvious that Ukraine is going to lose. And you got Zelensky before, sending Down syndrome kids to the front line. Now he's out there asking seniors to sign up and women. He's running out of people.
right.
And so this presents a real problem to Europe in the sense that the propaganda they've been putting out is that if Ukraine falls, Putin's coming for the rest of Europe. So what do? I've heard for at least 2 to 3 months that NATO was contemplating sending in 250,000 troops under the humanitarian idea. Okay, they did that in Bosnia back in '95, then Kosovo in '99. I mean, they weren't NATO people either, but they used that. Oh, we're killing all these people for humanitarian reasons,
Right.
And that is the excuse that I think they're planning to use to justify sending in troops to Ukraine, largely because what do? I mean, they can't allow it to fall. All their narratives, everything is, NATO's telling everybody increase your defense spending by 5%, all this stuff. What do you do if Ukraine falls? And you can send them all the weapons you want. Okay, it still takes a finger to push, to pull the trigger on a gun. If you don't have the people to shoot the guns, you're losing. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Agreed.
So, I finally put it out mainly when, I don't want to mention which one, but an NGO actually sent out a letter confirming what I've been hearing for some time. And I know somebody that got one of the letters, and he said, hey, now they're saying what you've been saying for the last 2 or 3 months, off camera. So I said, okay, fine, I'll put that out. It's really a quagmire here. I mean, how does Europe deal if Ukraine falls? It's a real mess.
It is.
So, sending in 250,000 troops and using, Bosnia or Kosovo as the, precedent to do this seems to be what they have in their mind. I am concerned that may have a major factor in why it appears Trump did a 180. And so in Scotland, all of a sudden, Europe, bends the knee on the whole trade deals, and I think this is all kind of connected. And Trump basically reversing his positions. And I did a piece on sanctions the other day,
Okay.
and I just listed all the sanctions that they've done to
Hmm.
countries. All right. I mean, Cuba, in 1960, it's still there.
Hmm.
Okay. You're talking about 60 years later, and they still haven't worked, but they didn't rescind them. Iran. What this comes down to, it's the neocon playbook. It makes them feel maybe all warm and fuzzy inside. Oh, we're hurting them. And they're designed, they believe that if you do this, then there'll be regime change or something. People rise up, overthrow the whichever leader, if it's the Ayatollah, Putin, or Castro or whatever. Um, but it's always the same exact playbook.
Hmm.
It doesn't really change.
No.
Yet it has never worked.
No, yeah, sanctions do not work, generally speaking, unless the goal, and this is one of the things I've been thinking about over the last few years, is I've watched this, and I agree with you about the fact that sanctions don't ever create the thing that they say they want them to create, right? We're going to use this weekend to regime change, and Biden we're going to turn the ruble into rubble and all of this stuff, all the shock and awe stuff that they did right after in March of 2022, right after Russia moved into Ukraine. There's another angle on that, which is that their playbook is that the goal is actually to keep the conflict frozen so that they can spin it up in the future. If whenever they're losing, it's like another round of sanctions. Like, we can always keep this conflict frozen in perpetuity. It's kind of an open wound, right? North Korea, South Korea is still an open wound.
Yeah.
Iran, Israel, and is more settled than it's been for a variety of reasons that we've talked about in other places, mostly because everybody shot their wad, got a punch in the mouth, and now they all have to retrench, at least for now. But putting sanctions on Iran didn't end the conflict. They made sure that the
No.
conflict couldn't be ended. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with Cuba in a certain way that can't be ended. And actually, the Cuban sanctions at this point are more a reflection of Florida politics than they are anything else. The Cuban vote in Florida. But that's a sad reality of the situation between Florida and Cuba. So that may be what's actually happening here. That if I'm just thinking it through, maybe this is what we're looking at, which is that NATO wants to move 250,000 troops into Ukraine to stabilize the situation, because, as you rightly pointed out, the Ukrainians are in bad shape across the entire line of contact. And Putin could at any moment put large amounts of troops on the border, push to the Dnieper River, and take the territory that he wants to take. But he doesn't want to do that because he knows that the response from NATO would be over the top. So maybe the goal here is, just as I was thinking about this as you were talking, that we need to freeze this conflict before Ukraine falls. We put NATO troops in that stops Putin from moving any farther. We sanction the heck out of Russia and preclude the possibility of any kind of U.S.-Russia rapprochement in the future by leaving all of these sanctions in place. That may be the best that we hope for here. Now, I know you have a different view on that, but I'm just throwing it out for you to consider and to throw into the hopper. And that may be what we're looking at here. So they can keep that casus belli, so that they can then do all of the internal spending that they want to do internally within the EU to, start the process of fiscal integration, political integration, roll everything up into Brussels and the ECB, which is clearly also on their agenda, right?
The only reason I maybe slightly disagree with that is that if the sanctions were simply targeted against Russia, now we have Trump coming out with 25% against India and saying that we're going to attack anybody that deals with Russia this way. So that's what makes me think this is still the neocon playbook that they
Fair.
think if they can cut off all the revenue that Russia gets from anybody,
Mhm.
China, India, whatever, then they will fall. You know, I just disagree with it. I mean,
I I agree completely. I also think that
but
the concept of putting those secondary sanctions on are unenforceable. The Chinese have made it clear that they wouldn't,
oh
enforce it.
yeah,
I mean, they're completely unenforceable. What are they going to? What are we going to do? Resort to piracy on the high seas and stop Russian tankers from going from Kosovo and on the Kamchatka Peninsula down to China and back again? Like, are we actually going to get to that point? Because that's what's happening, right? The
yeah. Look,
Russians
I
send
mean, you know, the whole thing started with Blinken. Um, Back in 2014, Obama went to SWIFT and wanted to have Russia removed,
yes.
and they refused. So they
Hmm.
replaced the head of SWIFT in 2019, and this guy does whatever he's told.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
and it was Blinken. Um, like I say, I mean, you know, I know a bunch of these people. I've been to dinner with neocons. They just don't think clearly, in my opinion. They just think with a very myopic view. They don't understand anything beyond their own personal goals. So you
Mm.
had Blinken remove Russia from SWIFT.
Yes.
So then that was a red flag to everybody else. And then he actually had the audacity to go to China and say, if you help Russia, we'll do the same to you.
Yeah.
Voila. That creates bricks. Right? Um, India looks at it. Okay, yeah, we're not going to agree to that kind of stuff either. You're not going to dictate to the world,
Right.
and that's what these neocons think that they can do.
Hmm.
Um, and um, you know, I am concerned that Lindsey Graham was suddenly endorsed by Trump. Why? I mean, it was Lindsey Graham and John McCain. I mean, I've got the videos. They were the ones there to start this war.
Yep.
Um, you know, I have one video I put on our site with him with Zelensky saying this is the best money we ever spent to kill Russians.
Right. No,
What the
exactly.
hell?
Right.
I mean, if you said that about blacks or Muslims, I mean, it's a hate crime. It's
Mhm. Of
okay if you say it against Russians, though, I guess. I mean,
course.
so I just,
That was a
I,
very low point in Lindsey Graham's life. I mean, I listened to that and I went, as an American, I'm ashamed of the fact that this man actually has, power and the ability to do anything. But unfortunately, he's still this is the Lindsey Graham angle here is a very difficult one to unpack, right? Because he has to have certain uh, I hesitate to use the word leverage over Trump, right? But he has something. Um, and this is one of those moments where, okay, this is one of those things where it's a piece of data that doesn't make any sense other than Lindsey gave Trump what he wanted in other areas. And so Lindsey demanded this in another area. And,
perhaps. I
that's,
mean, I also know I had contacts with Rubio.
mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay.
And then when he was picked for Secretary of State, I mean, I know he's a neocon.
Right.
If you look before, he wanted to go after Russia, blah blah
Mm-hmm.
blah blah. And I spoke to someone in D.C. and I said, "Why the hell did he pick Rubio if he's against neocons?" And what I was told was that was a peace offering to the neocons.
Right. Right.
So, you know, there is a thread there somewhere. Not exactly entirely sure where it all goes,
Right.
but I just know their playbook and how this functions. And when he says he's going after countries who buy from Russia, Now you're really crossing a major red line.
Yeah.
And that to me is much more dangerous because once you do, I mean, as I published about all the sanctions, they're still there on Cuba since 1960. They never have lifted them. Okay. Just go down the lines. Korea, all this stuff. Once they impose this, you don't get rid of them. So if you're going to do this to India, quite frankly, if I was India, I go, okay, fine. The 250 billion of U.S. treasuries I have for sale.
Yes.
I would be dumping the shit out of them, pushing U.S. interest rates up. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I grew up playing chess.
Right. No, I agree with you. It's the same thing that the Russians did in preparation. They understood the war when the Russians dumped all their treasury bonds. Remember in like 2021, that should have been everybody's tell that we were not avoiding war in Ukraine. I mean, I saw it. I said this is the right thing for them to do, but I'm like, there's still a way for us to avoid this war, and I was wrong. Right. Russia moves across the border on February 22nd in a shock and awe move that they'll let everybody know that we're going first. And,
but they knew that. Zelensky even did an interview with the Washington Post, and they said, you had information that Russia was going to go in. Why didn't you warn your people? And his response to the Washington Post was, if I told them, I would have lost $7 billion in capital flows, basically.
Yeah.
The day before, you had Camilla at the Munich Peace Conference.
Right.
And look, she's just a complete idiot anyhow. And she just reads whatever's on the cue cards like Biden, which is why they wanted her. And she said, oh, Ukraine should join NATO, knowing that is the major issue.
Oh, and get nuclear weapons too.
Yeah, I mean, they knew he was on the border. Mm-hmm. How does Ukraine attack military bases in Russia, all this, without U.S. intelligence and spy satellites? They can't. Okay. Even that's come out that there was an operation in Frankfurt that was giving them all the targeting information. Mm-hmm. So this is basically the neocons. As you know, I mean, even Bill Kristol, whose father started the neocon movement, mm-hmm. even spoke at one of our conferences. I used to argue with him back in the 90s. Right. He even wrote the book, which you can buy on Amazon, Justifying Going to Iraq.
Yep.
All right. Just for, as you know, I used to be part of the vetting process. They would send me out to meet with these people who wanted to run for president. And it was really, I got back and they said, what do you think? Do you think he's smart enough to handle it? Blah, 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 whatever. I explain how we're all interconnected.
Right.
And it's not just one country or this. What happens, in one place causes ripple effects elsewhere. Like we were all bankrupt in 1896, and if it wasn't for World War I and II, the money wouldn't have come here, and the U.S. wouldn't have been the financial capital. So, and that was not a domestic political thing that we did to create that. Right. It happened externally.
Right.
So, then I was asked. They wanted me to go meet with Bush Jr. And they said, oh, but this one's different. I said, what do you mean it's different? And they said, oh, he's really stupid. Up to that point in time, all these people I had to meet, governor of Oklahoma, Ross Perot, all this stuff that they would send me out to. It was all, are they intelligent enough? And can they comprehend how the world works? And then to be told that he was just stupid, they picked the cabinet for Bush.
Right.
All right. They picked Cheney. They put it, they picked Bill Kristol, all of them. All right. I was asked to be chief economic advisor. I said, no, thanks. I said, I own my own company.
Right.
Most people don't realize why all these heads at Goldman Sachs go to government. Because if you take the job, you must sell your stock that's a conflict of interest.
Right.
Because you must do so for the government. It's tax free.
Mm-hmm.
Nice little loophole.
Nice.
All right.
Yeah. Very
That's
nice
why
loophole. Right?
all these guys, heads of Goldman Sachs, and they immediately go to government. Oh, I care. Yeah, right. You care. All right. You sold all your stock for tax free, and then you suddenly get a headache, you know? But so I argued with Crystal back then.
Right.
And that's when I heard is if we remove Saddam, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, we'll bring peace to the Middle East. I said, have you ever been there? It's tribal. We drew the damn borders when we carved up the Ottoman Empire. They don't see themselves as Iraqi, Syrian, whatever. They see themselves as Sunni, Shiite, Kurd. You know, the dictators kept everybody from killing each other.
Right.
Once you remove Saddam, I mean, you can even look on YouTube. You got Tony Blair's apology. We thought we were saving the people. We didn't realize we were subjecting to more sectarian violence. This is the problem with these people.
Yeah.
They just set out the goal, and that's what I mean that they're very myopic.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we have to take Saddam out. What comes after? We'll worry about that later. Long-term planning.
No, I agreed completely. And just to remind everybody, like I've been saying, you trace Irving Kristol and his son Bill, who is one of the most odious people on the planet, and you realize that they're all just downstream of Trotsky. Like they're literally the inheritors of Trotsky, and they do not care what party they need to take over in order, no matter where they are. It doesn't matter if they're in Germany or in France or in the UK or the United States. This is a mindset, and Trotskyites are notorious for the concept of permanent revolution, and they believe in revolution. The revolution is a violent, disgusting mechanism by which to affect social change, and this is inherently the problem. They are always looking for revolution because they actually want the chaos, because they're really just colonialists at heart. Like this is where I will always push back on the idea that they don't have a long-term plan. They have a long-term plan, which is to steal everything from everybody else and to install their whatever they think is their utopia. And they don't care if a whole bunch of people die. The more people die in the place that they want to take over, the easier it is for them to take over after all the violence is over. Like that's the way they think, and they don't like. It's very obvious to me that to these people that what's a million dead Ukrainians and Russians fighting over swampland and in the Donbass? A good start. That's the way. That's who they are, and we have to realize that.
I think they got their backs up when Khrushchev said, "We will bury you," and that's when it all started. Well, we're going to spread democracy to the world.
Sure.
And so that is their pathetic, claim for their colonialistic, but we don't even live in a democracy anyhow.
Right. No, they've done everything imaginable to keep us from actually being democratic, and the European Union is anti-democratic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you had Kalis, lecturing China on democracy. You've never, the head of the EU, nobody in the EU stands for election.
Right.
And use Wikipedia, look at Ursula. She's never been elected to anything.
I know.
She's a bureaucrat. All right, that's it. They use that as the excuse to justify all this nonsense. I mean, Ursula had the audacity to call Putin a dictator. He's at least been elected. You have never stood for an election.
I know. And the people who, well, I mean, she was elected by the vote of the European Parliament, which has no legislative power. Let's remind
Right.
everybody. I don't know if people understand that. I was actually explaining this to my daughter literally last night. I'm like, you do realize that in the EU Parliament doesn't have any lawmaking ability at
Right.
all. The only real power they have is to kick anybody out who doesn't go along with the flow. Like, if that's the only real power they have, is to invoke, Article 4 or Article 7 of the EU Charter, to say, well, you Viktor Orban are evil for not going along with our humanitarian ideas, so we're going to either kick you out or take away your voting rights. That's like literally the only thing they can do. And then the blocks within the European Parliament choose the leadership of the European Commission and the European Council, and then the European Council is made up of the heads of state of each of the member nations, just to remind everybody what the structure of the EU is. But it's designed from the ground up to be anti-democratic,
Oh
and
yeah, they don't
MEPs
want
have no
any.
power whatsoever.
Yeah, they don't want anybody at all. Um, they know what's right, and their idea of democracy is that we're too stupid to know what's best.
Right.
So that's pretty much it. But so I mean,
I just
yes,
flat out
they
call. I
have
just
a
flat out call them.
long-term
Yeah.
goal of spreading this idea of democracy, but communism failed, and they
But
didn't
they're
change.
still communists.
It-
Like the European Union is literally made up of,
oh
they're
yes,
just
yes,
communists. I call it the
uh,
EUSSR for a reason, and it's
yeah,
actually a better version of the USSR because they've got better technology now to do this, all the surveillance and the money
yeah.
surveillance and
There's
everything else.
free speech, all the rest of the stuff. I
Right.
mean, it's just it is getting crazy. But I mean, there is no. Um, what I mean by being myopic, they have that idea of controlling the entire world.
Yes.
Um, but they take down Iraq, even if they were um, correct. When Kalis just recently had the meeting with China, um, telling them that she wanted them to back off of Russia, tell them not to, to end the war, blah blah blah, and um, basically it ended up from what somebody was there that I knew, and they said he got really angry at her. He never got so angry. They said they never saw him so angry because basically he said, you take down Russia, we're next. He knows that.
Yes.
And like she doesn't have any answer for that because it's true. Look, that was the coup against Gorbachev.
Yes.
In the book I wrote, The Plot to Seize Russia, I got a hold of all the declassified documents from the Clinton administration. And what it was that we invited Russia to join NATO. I got the documents and all this stuff. All right. And so the hardliners staged the coup against Gorbachev when he was there in Crimea, on vacation, because they were concerned that he would agree to join NATO. And to them, that was waving the right flag that Russia lost. That's when Yeltsin stands on the tank, don't shoot, and the coup fails, etc. All right. And to further complicate issues,
Right.
how the Epstein thing is tied into this.
Oh, this I want to hear.
Epstein hooked up with Giselle Maxwell in '91 at the time of this coup. Okay.
Right.
Maxwell, I know for a fact, was basically saying that in order, if they wanted to be recognized as the new leadership of Russia, that to release all the Jews to go to Israel.
Correct.
That was what he was negotiating. The coup fails. Um, Supposedly, the same thing happens afterwards, but this is the club that they tried to get me to join.
Hmm.
He lost 200 million pounds that he was trading with from the employee pension fund, because they always get into these things. They think they're going to make a guaranteed trade.
Right.
I warned them back then, as I did in '98. I said, look, my computer says, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. And he lost 200 million pounds. But because it was the pension fund money, he was under subpoena. Okay. He was about to testify when he falls off his yacht.
Oh, Robert Maxwell. Yeah.
Yes. Now, Bill Browder was the right hand man with Maxwell.
Yes.
Okay. He
Mm-hmm.
then goes and joins Safra, Edmund Safra of Republic Bank. All right.
Right.
Epstein even goes to Maxwell's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
That's all documented. All right. Now, I know that it was rumored, but pretty good sources say that Maxwell was working for the Mossad.
Right.
All right. And Epstein was in there. All this nonsense about pedophiles and whatever, that's the smoke screen.
Mm-hmm.
People think, oh, they won't release these documents because they're pedophiles. First of all, a real pedophile, I think, would be a 6 or 8-year-old kid.
Sure.
Not a 17-year-old girl that you and I couldn't possibly tell if she's 17 or 20.
Yes, exactly.
But more interesting is that U.S. has the highest legal age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
Britain is 16.
Yep.
So Epstein's Island, if you move it 50 miles to the west, you're in British Virgin Islands. Right. Legal age is 16.
Right.
So the prince, he could have had sex with a 17-year-old in London, not an issue. All right. So this is all a blackmail scam.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to release, because I don't think even Trump understood what the hell they stepped into.
Right.
These guys that are on there are probably really victims.
Yes.
And blackmailed. But the question is, okay, what did you do for Epstein?
Right. Yeah. No, exactly.
This wasn't just party time. This was, and it was Epstein having, sex with young girls. All right, fine. If that's your thing, you do that maybe with some friends from the pub.
Right.
Not heads of state.
What this is I know I'm glad you brought all this up, because this is something that Dexter White and I have been have talked about in terms of what we think was going on with Epstein the entire time. And the age of consent thing is a very important thing. You get a guy. So there's two things I want to bring up about this, and to try and clarify why Epstein is so important. So the first thing is that in many states in the United States, you can be tried by the if you have sex below the age of consent in your home jurisdiction in the United States, regardless of where you did it, Thailand, the British Virgin Islands, or whatever, you can still be prosecuted for having sex with a minor. Like, so right. And if you don't know that, and you're some schmuck from from North Carolina doing who's in some congressman from North Carolina got sent over there now this is the interesting phrase, what Dexter calls the pro quo quid, which is that they got them to do X, Y, and Z, introduce this rider into a bill, or donate $5 million to the Clinton Global Initiative or something like that. And then the payoff for them is, hey, Bill, you get to go bang 17-year-olds in the British Virgin Islands, right? And that's your that yeah, and that's part of your payout. You get, not only did you, did you get Glass-Steagall repealed, we'll put $5 million or $10 million in the Clinton Global Initiative, and you get to bang 17-year-olds. Oh, but by the way, in Arkansas, the age of consent is 18. You're now, a pederast. And this is the problem. And now everybody is stuck. And I think that's, part of the problem. This is exactly what you're talking about. How many of these guys were either set up or, or walked into this never thinking that any of this would ever come out, because, well, hey, the network is in place to protect everybody. But now that they have them, at that point, they own them. And Epstein's real value is that he was basically laundering money for everybody. And that was his real value, of having set up all the accounts and the money laundering scheme. And that was his real value. And that's the real scandal, to build up this whole NGO network and dark money network to do the things that we're all now complaining about, that we're watching the architecture defend itself against today, and that built the world that we all hate. And that's the real scandal about Epstein. And the sex part of it is what Ian Burlingame, my friend Ian Burlingame, would call the cover for status, right? You have that as the means by which to burn Epstein and use him as the thing to focus everybody on, and to ignore all the real perfidy that went on behind the scenes.
Well, I can tell you that I was told a long time ago that from members of Congress that J. Edgar Hoover had a file on everybody.
Right.
And he would walk in and say, gee, look at we found. If we found it, your opponent could find it.
Right.
We'll make sure this doesn't see the light of day. Oh, okay, fine, thank you. And then he owns them. Mm-hmm. This is what I was told, from somebody who was on Capitol Hill for, 20-some years.
Right.
I was warned personally back in the 90s, be careful, they will use women to try to get into you.
Right.
So I was told, not by them, by other people, this is the way Wall Street works. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, fine, thank you. So any girl would come up like that, I'd hold up the Silver Cross and, yeah, what do you want? I was actually coming back from London one time. My assistant went to the bathroom. I'm standing at the curb waiting for the limo to pick us up there at JFK to take us back. And there's a tall, good-looking black girl next to me. In stiletto heels, short black leather skirt, which I assumed was the typical, uniform for hookers in New York City.
Right.
I thought she's, they're looking for guys coming in off the London flight to, hey, you need some,
right,
relaxed time or whatever. And so I'm just being polite, oh, you travel to London a lot? Yeah, I go back and forth a lot. That's it, and I'm waiting for the limo. My assistant come out. The car comes, we get in, and she says to me, boy, I can't leave you alone for 5 minutes. You're talking to a supermodel. I said, what are you talking about? I thought that was a hooker. It was Naomi Campbell.
Yeah.
And I find out Naomi Campbell supposedly was dealing with Epstein. Look, you just don't know where all this stuff goes. You just, but anybody that thinks that Epstein was just into young women, come on. Maybe you do that with some friends from the pub. All right, but you don't do that with heads of state, etc. Right. And I think one of the girls that Epstein had said that, he had commented that Clinton owed him a favor. Mm-hmm. So, never said what was for, but I think that was in one of her testimonies. But that's what I mean, that you don't know what this stuff is really about, but it's got nothing to do with just pedophiles. Come on. And young girls. This goes a lot deeper. And the reason I bring up Maxwell is he was deeply involved in Maxwell's finances.
Yeah, Epstein was. Yes.
All right. So, and I know that, Maxwell was part of working with Mossad. So I suspect, I mean, who is Epstein doing this for? That's the real question.
Right.
Was it CIA? Was it Mossad or whatever? And I think that's part of the reason why they don't want to bring any of this stuff out,
Mm-hmm.
because Trump stepped into a real pile of shit. And it's like, uh, interesting. Uh, I mean, the deep state is much deeper than people suspect.
Yes.
And it's hard to, look, I wish them all the luck, but there was just, I just know Washington. It's just, you're not going to get, the deep state is Washington.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole damn city.
Yep.
It's, I mean, back in the 80s when I was asked, they're forming G5, and I warned them, I said, if you manipulate the dollar down 40%, you're going to cause a crash in 2 years, which turned out to be the 87 crash.
Mm-hmm.
So then I wrote a letter to Reagan. I was told, oh, you went out of committee. You'll never be called again. I said, I don't give a shit. All right. When the 87 crash happened, because I did that, then they had to call me in.
Right.
It's just, I just know the way this works. I was told, be a good boy. You can make $5 million a year because they need fake, economic studies for every bill that passes.
Right.
But
right.
They tell you what it's supposed to say. And here, we need a study on this that Obama's health care is going to save $1 trillion. Okay, fine. Over what? Oh, the next 100 years, that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, okay. So
that's what it is.
I understand that completely, and yes, I do wish them all luck, and I think that we have better people at the top of the architecture than we've had in the past, and I think they understand that this is the interesting thing about Tulsi Gabbard as DNI is that she's actually using that office. This is one of the things I think that Sundance over at Conservative Treehouse does very, very well. I will always give Sundance props when he's talking about the intelligence community, because I think that's where his expertise is. And one of the things that Gabbard is beginning to do, and this ties into everything we're talking about, is that she's using the DNI as a means by which to fortify the president as opposed to bind him down and not give him the information that he needs. And there's a lot of good data that says that that's exactly what she's doing. Not the least of which is that she's beginning to fire all the people in the very important second and third layers of the bureaucracy that have been the gatekeepers and the information silos between one group and another, between the money people and the policy people and all that stuff. Read a couple of really good articles about that in recent days of who she's fired and why it's important. And it's the slow but sure process of getting rid of those people to allow the good people within these organizations, because none of these organizations are monoliths. There are plenty of good people doing work at the CIA or the DOD or whatever. They're just so far down the stack and they can't rise. I've talked to Larry Johnson about this directly, and he's like, yeah, this is the way it works. The good people aren't able to get the information up the chain because the chain has been corrupted, not just from the public figures, the DNI, the CIA director or whatever, but there's also the section chiefs and then their assistants, and there's two, and this is all 3 or 4 layers deep, and so you have to go and get rid of those people and just fire them, or give them enough rope that you have the cause to fire them. So you ask for X, Y, and Z. They don't give it to you. They slow walk it. They think you're going to extend it, pretend, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, you know what? No, sorry. I asked for this 30 days ago. You didn't give it to me. You now are gone. And by the way, when you're fired, you no longer have immunity. The government doesn't have to, like, you're a private citizen now. Now we can go after you for all the things that we know you did. That's a very slow process. And as my friend Alexander Mercouris reminds us all the time, that Political time runs a lot faster than legal time. But legal time is much slower and much more deliberate, and it takes a long time for cases to be built and for investigations to happen and all of that stuff. But unfortunately, we're in a political pressure cooker, and our opponents, and this is where we get into people like Browder and and the heads of state and everybody else, and these governments, they will use the media and the political time in order to force people attempting to reform it into unwinnable situations. And that's kind of what's happened with Epstein. That's the way I read it at this point.
Also, that is what happened between me and Buffett. When I just put on our private blog, I said, look, they're back. They're going to manipulate silver, take it up, and then crash it in 98.
Right.
All right. And they made the mistake. Look, I knew what was happening. They even walked their broker on the floor, walked across the ring, showed all Buffett's orders to my guy, and said, join us. They were always trying to get me to join them.
Right.
And I never really trusted them. But so I put out that info to my clients. Be careful. This is just another manipulation they're going to do from September to January. And so they got pissed. They got their shill in the Wall Street Journal. And he calls me, oh, you say silver's being manipulated, blah, blah, blah. I think it's you, blah, blah. And he even said to me, he says, okay, fine. If it's being manipulated, give me a name. I said, fine, I'll give you the name. Let me see you actually publish it. I said, Warren Buffett. And he said to me, oh, that's absurd. Warren Buffett doesn't trade commodities. I said, well, that is, what you don't know. And I slammed the phone down. The problem was, once he put in the Wall Street Journal, Armstrong says silver is being manipulated. We question him, blah, blah, blah. All right. Because it appeared there, the CFTC now must call me because maybe some congressman's going to see that and say, hey, are you investigating this? So they call me. They can see everybody's positions. They know I wasn't the one. And I didn't give a name or anything. I just said, look, it's taking place in London. It's outside of your jurisdiction, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, when you say that to a bureaucrat, that pisses them off. Really? Well, we can pick up the phone and call back. I said, look, I guess that's what you're going to have to do. And I slammed down the phone. A few hours later, I get calls from London silver brokers. Marty, we've all been called into the bank in New York in the morning. I said, oh, shit. I guess they made the call. Then Buffett comes out that night. All right, it's me. I bought $1 billion worth of silver, but I didn't intend to. It's not a manipulation. It's a long-term investment, which he then sells out 3 months later. But, that's exactly what you're saying. Mm-hmm. All right. Once they put it in the Wall Street Journal, that compelled them to call me.
Right.
If that never took place, nobody would have ever known. I would have said, look, silver's going up to $7. They're going to crash it. Be careful. That's it. End of story. It would have never have been this big thing, but they tried their best. They thought they could break me or something. I said, I'm institutional. I'm not retail. I don't care what the hell you print.
Right.
Right. It was just, interesting from that perspective.
Sure.
But you take Congress, how the deep state works there. I could run for Congress. I'll say whatever you want to hear. I'll save the whales. I won't make it rain on Sundays, whatever. I get there and they go, glad you're here. Very nice. And the first day they have this meeting, and all the newbies come in. This is the way it works.
Yep.
Okay. And they tell you what to vote. And whatever issues you ran on, very nice. Forget the whales. Not interested. All right.
It's going to rain on
and
Sunday.
yeah, if you look, the votes are down party line.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. You're instructed to do it. Now, if you don't want to do that, you really think you have this power because you've been elected, good luck. You cannot they use the rules to screw you.
Right.
You can't make a motion on the floor. All motions must come through committee.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're not a good boy, you don't get on the committee.
Right.
You know, it's so rigged that they finally, I was told they finally changed the rules. Because when Bonner was there as the head of the Republicans,
right.
and there were, I think, 80 some Tea Party people that were elected.
Right.
And they refused to follow him.
Mm-hmm.
So the question was, can he really, deliver the Republican vote and all that shit? He blocked, and he began retaliating. And I knew some of the people, if they supported the Tea Party group, they were removed from any financial committee.
Yep.
And so you either did what he said or else. And I spoke to somebody in Congress, and after he's been out, whatever, they changed the rules so nobody could ever do that again.
Right.
All right, but it was getting to the point of the Speaker of the House being a dictator.
Yeah.
You do as I say. You can't make a motion. All motions come from committee. You don't do what I say, you're not getting on a committee. I mean, it's you want to worry about finance, we're going to put you on the dog catchers committee.
Right.
It's I've dealt with Washington for a long time. I mean, they passed a law you can't buy a politician dinner to wipe out corruption and all this nonsense.
Right.
I was invited to an IMF dinner. They rented the entire National Gallery in Washington. Everybody's there. All right. There's lobster tails, filet mignons, you name it, it's there. All right. We had to stand. As long as you stand, it's an hors d'oeuvre. That's okay. If we sit down, it's illegal because it's dinner.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine? I was with Paul Volcker at the time. He's almost like 7 feet. Roosevelt almost 7 feet. I'm always like looking up at him.
Right.
I'm holding his plate so he could cut his steak, and then he holds mine. I mean, I said, this is absolutely nuts.
Insane. Right.
But it's all dog and pony show. I had to work. They wanted me to work late. Back then, revising the Social Security system and all that shit. And I think it probably cost the government at least $50,000 to figure out, because we're going to be working late. We're going to have dinner, and they had to figure out what could we do, because I'm not a congressman. Right. All right, so I can't buy it. So the ethics committee finally, I don't know how many times back and forth, had a rule on this. I had to order a pizza from one place. They ordered pizza from someplace else, and I wasn't allowed to share. And I'm like, as if they're going to do something because I gave them a piece of pizza.
Right.
I mean, it just gets to be completely bizarre.
Yeah. And it's and this is what you're trying to unwind out of this scenario, right? And now we're trying to like take that as our framework and then apply it to how policy gets made at the big level, right? And then you ask yourself, and with that perspective, it makes perfect sense that you, cynicism is your default position, which is that nothing will ever change, right? Okay. So let's all that stuff is great and it's fantastic, and I'm really glad you threw some of those examples out there for this. So let's move back to the big issues of the day um, on this, because I think it's imperative to try and figure out how Trump is going to get through that in order to be able to achieve anything that he actually wants to achieve. And then when you actually look at what's being done at the speed that has been done, it's almost everything you just said. It's almost unthinkable that anything has gotten done at all at this point. And so then what kind of leverage and arm twisting was he able to do to get these people who clearly, and I'm talking mostly about the Republicans at this point, to actually fall in line with his agenda, which they're all against? Like, and that's blatantly obvious that he doesn't have a whole lot of friends up there. What he has are people that he can arm twist to do what he wants and to get bills passed. Like, if you look at the budget reconciliation bill and you look at the stablecoin bills and you look at all the things that he's put in place at this point, those are massive fundamental changes as to the way we're going to fund the government and we're going to go forward. And it says to me that there's still value in some amount of this leverage and who actually controls the leverage. And this is, I think, where Epstein, we can actually circle back to Epstein, like who's actually in control of what information we have about Epstein at this point in order to get anything done. Because, I'll give you an example of what I think is a perfect example of this. You had Thomas Massie the day of the final House bill to resolve the budget reconciliation bill. And he's out there going, I've got 10 people that on my side that will vote against this, and we're going to scuttle this, and this is all wrong, and blah, 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 blah. And then 2 hours later or 3 hours later, the vote comes in 216 to 214 in favor, meaning Massey didn't actually have anybody on his side. He was bloviating and he was grandstanding, as Trump has accused him of multiple times. That tells me something. It tells me that Trump has leverage on the people that will tell one person one thing, but we're going to get this done. And I have to say, it's one of those moments. It's one of those moments that is kind of indicative of the fact that Washington is beginning to change at a certain level, but it's a very, very difficult process and deep process to change. So we can't expect miracles here on any front. We have to expect, incremental wins.
Well, also, being a monetary historian, with the stablecoin thing, when I saw that, I said, oh shit, they know war's coming. Why? Because you had China's been dumping debt like crazy. And now even the UK, I think, holds more US debt than China.
That is true.
And here's the problem. The neocons, in threatening everybody, at the same time, they ended up creating BRICS. And this is what I mean by they're very myopic.
Mm-hmm.
All right. They're only looking at their geopolitical power.
Right.
All right. China owned 10% of the national debt. Now you're threatening them. I'm sorry. If I'm China, I'm selling. Why? Because you're threatening war with me over Taiwan. Why would I own any U.S. debt? Because you will never pay it.
Right. I have a question for you. Before we go forward, you use the phrase 10% of our debt. Is that both public and private? Because China's official central bank holdings are about $750 billion. So you're saying that was total private and public. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
even in Japan, the private holdings are far, they use the US debt mainly as a hedge against their own government.
Sure.
So it's private that they're holding. But here's the issue. Um, in 1863,
Mm-hmm.
to fund the Civil War, what he did was what Lincoln did. They created a bank act. They allowed the banks to issue their own currency.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy them, national,
Right.
there's collector's items today, but they were backed by U.S. debt.
Yes.
So if they bought all the U.S. debt, they could issue currency against it. So therefore, the bank wasn't really taking money per se out of the system. It was
Right.
still being liquid. All right. The staple coins is exactly what they did to fund the Civil War. You issue a staple coin and against some collateral.
Right.
All right. Government debt. So they basically telling the banks, you buy the government debt because they can't sell it to China now
Right.
or other countries. All right. So when a country defaults, the default comes when you can't sell the new debt to pay off the old.
Right.
That's the problem.
That's
Okay.
where the European Union is.
Right. So you can't come out these neocons threatening everybody with war. And then, oh, gee, would you like to buy some of my bonds so I can buy some missiles to shoot your ass?
Right. Not going to happen.
I
Right.
mean, that's what I mean. They don't think things through.
Sure.
They're only looking at their particular objective.
Mm-hmm.
We must defeat Russia. Okay. But you now are using deficit spending to fund your wars.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the bulk of the U.S. national debt, probably well more than 50% is all accumulated debt from wars. We're
Right.
still paying interest on World War I. I mean, come on.
Right. Right.
So the staple coins is exactly the same way they funded the Civil War.
Right. Now, I am going to push back on that a little bit. And there's two reasons for this. The first one is that then we did not have a central bank issuing the currency.
Mm-hmm.
So the greenback was used to fund the Civil War in order to, as you rightly point out. And the structure is exactly the same now, which is to say that the banks will be able to issue their own stable coins. But I see that as an end run around the Federal Reserve being the primary issuer of debt of currency, as opposed to the Treasury being the final arbiter of how the debt is issued and circulates. What I see forming, and it's a little bit more. I think the history lesson is very important here, but I think that the situation is slightly different. It's pretty clear that Trump wants to change the way we do business, and he wants to go back to obviously a tariff regime where we balance trade through tariff imposition and create and affect a domestic version of the dollar versus an offshore version of the dollar, which are going to trade at two different prices. And the way you do that is you get the Treasury to fund the banking system, or to allow the banking system to be able to go to the Treasury directly for collateral in order to re-empower the banks, and so they're not necessarily beholden to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve exists mostly, I think, honestly, Martin, I think they want to go for the long-term plan. I think this is why he's going to get major pushback, is he actually wants to go back to a pre-1935 Fed. I'm riffing off of ideas that you've put into the zeitgeist that I've listened to you talk about for years and years. They're going back 10, 12 years. You've talked about how there's nothing wrong with the Fed in its original conception. This is right. This is a conversation that I haven't had a chance to have with you, but I've talked about it in other venues. So I like to spend some time on this, which is that the original conception of the Fed as you've pointed out multiple times. And this is when I was a hardcore Austrian going, no, no central bank. Like I was a classic, no way kind of guy. And I've come around my thinking on this, and I want to thank you for injecting these ideas into my head, which is that the original conception of the Fed was to have regional banks with regional interest rates and only backstop the commercial paper market, right? And not the U.S. Treasury market, which is, but now the Fed has been given this huge mandate to give us a single monolithic interest rate, the Fed funds rate, and they also have to backstop the U.S. Treasury market, which they did, of course, in order to be able to fund World War II, sell bonds to fund World War II. So that's the Banking Act of 1935. If my history on this is correct, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, in order to get rid of the current version of the Fed that we have to start building an infrastructure and a banking system locally, domestically, that would allow for that to happen, so that we can take those responsibilities away from the Fed. And I think that's what Besant is talking about. Besant is talking about. But at the same time, the Fed still exists now that it has SOFR to effectively obviate the Fed funds rate. I remember talking to Danielle DiMartino Booth when I had her on the podcast back in 22 or like February of 2022, and I was asking her about the switch from SOFR to LIBOR, from LIBOR to SOFR, and I was very early on in my arguments about what I thought was going on here. And I'll finish this point in a second, and I'll move on. Which is that, and I asked her, I said, "Well, wouldn't SOFR create a real market for money that would obviate the need for the Fed funds rate in the end? Because all the banks can just trade SOFR, which is a market-driven rate, and set in the money markets and the repo markets. And Florida can have one interest rate, and California can have another, because the banks locally can, just trade dollars based on the local demand for dollars. But if you don't have the banks don't have the ability to issue effectively dollars locally to express that supply and demand, they won't be able to do that." And what she said was, "Oh yeah, that's absolutely what would be on the table, but they'll never give that power up." That was 2022. And that's like the exact quote that she said to me. I'm like, okay, then I'm on the right path to thinking that this is how we would reform the Fed. Because the Fed is, at this point, it's an institution that has well beyond its own purpose, because what's happening in the rails that are being built and the infrastructure that's being built in the crypto space with stable coins and settlement, we don't need the Federal Reserve to manage that part of the market anymore, or at least in the future, we will not need it, because that market should outcompete the current Fed system, which makes sense to me. This is why Trump and Besant are effectively going after Powell. It's a means by which to popularize the idea that the Fed needs to be reformed. Not necessarily that they're angry with Powell for holding interest rates at 4.5%, but just using him as a kind of scapegoat. This has been my argument for a couple of weeks now, and I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it. So, I'm putting that out there for you to comment on and tell me if I'm crazy or whatever. I think this is an important topic, because this is what this all reads to me.
Well, the other aspect here is that the Fed came out and said there will be no central bank digital currency. And Trump echoed the same thing.
Right.
Why? Because under our Constitution, the Fed would need a search warrant to look at your bank account.
Right.
A bank does not. There are already rules in place that they are supposed to report any suspicious activity. Right. Okay. So this is the same model what they did with COVID. The First Amendment says the government shall not. It doesn't say YouTube, Facebook, etc. So they just pick up the phone. Hey, we don't like what this guy says. Kick him off. And they do. All right. I was warned by a former executive VP of one of the major newspapers in New York. Mm-hmm. And he told me that's how the government works with them. they call you and say, we have a favor, kill this story, spend it this way, or do that. If you do not, they, oh, did you pay your taxes? They come after you personally, not the newspaper.
Right.
That's how they control the press.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the Fed cannot do a central bank digital currency
Correct.
legally. All right. So, in that sense, they're issuing stable coins is constitutional because the Fed cannot.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Um, so when they issue the staple coins, then they buy the debt, which the Treasury would then fund. So it is back to that 1863 scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You're sidestepping the central bank. Um, on the interest rate side, against Powell, I do think there's a problem in the sense that Besser, was the right hand man of Soros in England for the whole break of the pound and all that shit. And Trump has always been a borrower, not a lender.
Agreed.
So from his perspective, he wants rates at 1% if he can.
Of
get
course,
them,
of course,
right?
of course.
And so I'm not so sure that they are fully aware of what happens if you do that to the Fed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because the Fed's role, besides all this stuff that people perceive, the Fed basically, the individual banks must have reserves, and they post that at the Fed.
Right.
So the Fed is the other role of it is to regulate the banking system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's separate from the interest rate stuff.
Right. So that's one of the things that Besson has said that he wants to take away, take back from the Fed. It was just that they shouldn't be heavily involved in bank regulation. I mean, he said that like right after he was confirmed. And
yeah,
I have to wonder. It's interesting because again, when I watched Powell when he was at the ECB at the beginning of the month, so on July 1st, he was at the ECB in a roundtable. I don't know if you saw it or not. I watched it's an hour roundtable with Lagarde, Andrew Bailey from the Bank of England, Ueda from Japan, and the South Korean head of the South Korean central bank. And he was asked about two things at the end of the thing that stuck out to me. The first 50 minutes of it was kind of boilerplate, Lagarde trying to schmooze Powell into, saying bad things about Trump, and it didn't really. He was asked about two things at the end of that thing, and it really struck me because, if this whole thing between Powell and Trump is real, then Powell would have thrown Trump under the bus when he was asked about the revision of the supplemental leverage ratio, to which Powell responded, am I for the thing that we at the FOMC just voted in favor of? Yes, I kind of am. Like, that's one. And then two, they were asked about stable coins, and the three answers that were given from the BOE, the ECB, and the Federal Reserve were very interesting, because Andrew Bailey, of course, as the Bank of England guy, said, look, I don't even know if these things are money or what. Did they even pass the test of money? Lagarde said, I believe that money is a public good, and my role at the ECB is to regulate it as a public good completely, and I will do everything I can to enforce that, which makes perfect sense. She wants to go to a digital euro. And Powell was like, oh, no, we're working with the Trump administration on all of this. Like, and this is a change from Powell, because he used to say he was against stablecoins. He was like, I'm okay with Bitcoin. It's just a commodity. I don't care about Bitcoin. But he used to be very against stablecoins. And certainly when they were being proliferated in the market, and we had all the real shit coins like FTX and Terra Luna and all these other ones that weren't backed by anything. They were all backing by each other's magic beans. They weren't backed by anything. There wasn't any real collateral. Now, all of a sudden, he's like, hey, we tried to work with the Biden administration to build real good crypto regulation for industry and banks to be able to work with these things. And we got rebuffed. And now we're working with the Trump administration on this. That was his answer. and that was a sea change that I note from Powell, and that's where the thing ended. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, Powell's on board with whatever it is that they're trying to do. So
That's basically the
I
point.
think Powell wants the Fed Reserve reformed as well. I think Powell looks at the 2% inflation mandate, which he was never in favor of. Um,
Mhm.
when he was a junior member of the FOMC, going back to the Bernanke days. And he's never, and I think he uses the whole dual mandate, which, of stable prices and full employment. He uses that as a cudgel in order to prosecute monetary policy the way he wants to, which is, look, we've got to get rid of all this. We've got a massive balance sheet that we shouldn't have, and we've done all these terrible things, QEs, the zero bound interest rates, none of which he's ever agreed with. So it almost seems to me like, you know, Powell's just being, is getting to be the scapegoat for reform of the Fed that needs to happen, and everybody knows it. But you've got to do so in such a way that you don't spook capital markets, because he gets to be kind of, the calm cop, while Trump gets to be, chaos cop,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
good cop.
This is my read on the situation. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, no, I mean, life. Look, um, I think it merely confirmed what I said, that the
Mm,
staple coins is the 1863 to fund the debt all over again.
right.
Um,
And who's going to be the holder of that debt, as opposed, I think the goal is to get Americans to hold the debt
you're right.
against, as opposed to foreigners to hold the debt. And but at the same time, what's interesting is I keep looking at the tick report every month, and we're at $9 trillion held by central banks. It keeps going up every month. Now, most of that buying has been out of Europe, by the way, over the last 4 years, over the arc of Powell's tight interest rate policy and his QT and high interest rates. They've been buying, and I think they've been using it for yield curve control, which I've said many times, in order to try and keep their rates down in Europe. But at some point, that trade has to reverse itself. At this point in time, it's Europe that actually owns almost $4 trillion worth of our debt. European central banks, including the Bank of England and all of its subsidiaries, it's about $4 trillion, and it's far more than officially than even China, because then you got to think about all the European corporates that own in the private holdings of American debt as well. So, I mean, this is a conundrum at this point. So, I know what you might want to
Well, Europe
say
is
about this.
just it's a basket case, really.
I agree.
The problem is that they, with all the COVID nonsense, lockdowns, then they had the climate change, then they put the sanctions on Russia, uh, and the German economy is shrinking.
Yeah.
It's shrunk at least by 3%, if not more. So I'm talking
Right.
about the number of available jobs are declining. Then you let in all these migrants, and all I see is conflicts, people upset, etc. And they shut down so many flights and stuff. I had a meeting in Berlin, and
Mm-hmm.
I had after that I had to run to a meeting in Rome. There was no direct flights. I said, what? I had to hire a private jet to get to the next meeting. I've
Wow.
never had to do that.
Berlin to Rome.
From Berlin to Rome, two capitals.
I was going to say that would be like going from Miami to Atlanta, and there would be no direct flights.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what the hell's going on here?
Right.
But they shut down airlines, because that's pollutes and all this other kind of stuff. So it's just nuts, completely nuts.
Right.
And I talked to we had staff in Germany that they said even a friend who was 60 years old was told to report for duty. I mean, they are all gearing up for war. I had a client who attended the Vienna Peace Conference.
Mm-hmm.
When he left, he said, "This is no longer about peace. everybody's now, how do we implement drafts? Prepare. This is Europe has no choice at this stage.
Yes.
And 3 years ago, when I would do interviews across Europe, from Netherlands to Palermo, and I would say, look, the computer says the EU will break up. Really? Now, when I do them, they go, when? We've had enough.
Right.
um,
Right.
so I get the difference just in 3 years.
Yeah.
And everywhere you talk, it's always the same thing. And the problem with Brussels, what they've done, once you create any kind of a centralized government, they get addicted to power.
Yep.
So, like as you said, we want the migrants. Let's get rid of Hungary, or block their vote. This because it has to be my way. Um, this was like Camilla during the election. Somebody was in one of her rallies and said about abortion and God, and you're at the wrong rally. This is the attitude. I get in, it's my way. Screw you, your religion, your God, whatever. I don't care. It's going to be what I do. This is what Stalin did. And, Lenin, if you really look objectively what Lenin did, yes, communism, but he argued that each republic should be like the United States in the sense that they retained their own sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Stalin. Lenin even wrote a letter, said, "Do not let him secede me." And
Right.
Russians that I know, they believe that Stalin poisoned them.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
he seized power and then he centralized it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is NATO. When, whenever you create an agency, Department of Education, USAID, whatever, they will fight tooth and nail to the end to keep going. It doesn't matter what they're doing. It's all about their salaries and their pensions.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So NATO is just a retirement home for old neocons. That's it.
Right.
And they only have, I saw the internal memos. Okay. They were shown to me. And they were upset that money was going to climate change and not to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, how do we remain relevant? The only way they remain relevant is constantly saying Putin wants to invade Europe.
Yep.
It's the same scenario as if it was Khrushchev.
Yes.
Now, that was when Khrushchev said we will bury you, it had nothing to do with conquest or things of that nature. Mm-mm. It was a philosophical communism is better than evil capitalism. That's basically what it was. So they're applying that same nonsense to Putin.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not communists. All right. They don't want to conquer capitalism. What do they get out of Europe? Nothing. No. They got to buy the energy from Russia. They have no real gold reserves. You walk in and all you're going to get is civil unrest, and the French are going to say, are you going to pay our pensions now? That's it.
No, this is, I agree with you. The idea that the Russians want to move, west of the Dnieper River is insane, as you pointed out, and I pointed out, over the years, which is that the ethnic Russians live east of the Dnieper, and relatively speaking, ethnic Ukrainians live west of it, and they don't want to be governed by Russians. They hate Russians, and that's fine. And the Poles hate Russians, and the Latvians hate Russians, and with good and fine if they have good reasons for it, it's fine. I don't see the Russians wanting to conquer people that hate them. Like that's not. They don't have the resources for that. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the resources. They don't have any of that stuff. So that's not what this is about. And for years, like look at Russia's military, architecture. It's all very defensive. It's defensive within about 600 miles of Moscow, and that would put you up towards about the Dnieper River, and anything beyond that is irrelevant. The question. So as always, Russia Ukraine is one of those forever wars. They just want the conflict to be there, to be able to PR, to raise capital, to do the things that they want, and to get the people to buy into the thing that they're trying to accomplish. It's the same thing I argue about Israel Iran. I I said coming into the conflict, I said, look, Iran's quest for a nuclear weapon is the forever war. It's the thing that everybody goes, oh my God, we have to stop this. And it's the same thing with Russia's going to invade Poland. No, they're not. The Poles would fight tooth and claw to keep the Russians out. And the Russians don't have any desire to be, governing Poles. And so it's facile on the face of it. And so then the question is, what are they actually willing to accomplish? What are they actually trying to accomplish here with all of this war talk and all this quote unquote war prep? Is it, as much about knowing full well that the United States is going to pull out of NATO eventually, because Trump has probably made it abundantly clear to them. It's like, look, I don't want to be your sugar daddy anymore. Like, if you didn't get the memo when he, forced Ursula von der Leyen into submission the other day, I think that was pretty clear. Like, I'm not your sugar daddy anymore. You're paying me 15% for access to our markets, period. It's over, done. The Marshall Plan is dead. Your retirement communities for old European communists and colonialists is over. We're not paying for it anymore. Now, the question is how we get out of that with a minimum of violence. That's I think what I keep trying to figure out a path through that as best as possible. And for the lack of a better term, I think Trump is trying to do that as well. The problem is nobody trusts each other. And
no, I won't say who, but I spoke to somebody close to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought they would think I was a conspiracy theorist or whatever. I said, look, my opinion is we got to get the hell out of NATO. They're going to create a false flag to invoke Article 5 and try and drag us in.
Yes.
The response was, we know you're right. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, wow. Okay, you actually agree with me?
Yeah. And that's a sea change.
Yes. So I know the person that I spoke to. Mm-hmm. Is close to Trump.
Fair enough.
Okay, so it's I was surprised at that response. And it's just, you even had Jamie Dimon at Davos saying Trump was right, should have got the hell out of NATO. I mean, NATO has long, it had a shelf life and it's expired. You throw the milk out, basically.
Yeah, agreed.
And its only purpose is to create war. That's it.
Yes.
It's not interested in peace.
Yeah, no, I have gotten to the point, Martin, where it's very clear that the old world that we've lived in since World War II, the end of World War II, is rapidly coming to a conclusion. And the people who have arrogated power to themselves and lived high on that system, be it the Eurodollar based financial system or, NATO, all the aspects of this, the old intelligence, black market, selling drugs and trafficking children, that system itself is rapidly coming to a conclusion because Americans no longer want to pay for it. And the political pressure from the ground up here in the United States is that we're not interested in this anymore. And that means that all of that infrastructure are what I would like to call rapidly depreciating assets. And if you look at, War Inc. or NATO Inc. or whatever you want to call it, they're looking at this going, well, I've got all these assets on the balance sheet and these are depreciating. What do I do with them? Well, that one I can spin off into a different organization, and that one has to be liquidated. And that one's got no more maximal value than it has right now than to drop it into and use it in a way to advance whatever cause we can to survive. And that's been my kind of my operative framework for a while. And the more I apply that, it seems to be predictive in what's going to happen next. And I think NATO is one of those rapidly depreciating assets. So you use it or lose it. And you use it for your maximal advantage if you're Europe at this point to get as much out of the US as possible before we finally
Yeah,
say
look,
it's
they
enough.
are um, directing everybody, including even Canada,
Mm-hmm.
increase your defense spending to 5%.
Yes.
You don't even have economic growth at 3. Okay, so this is deflationary.
Yes.
Um, you know, our
Mm-hmm.
computer has shown that Europe could easily go into a depression going into 2028. It has nothing going for it.
Right.
Nothing.
Right.
All right. Okay, fine. You're going to completely shut down. I think it still gets maybe 10% of its oil from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the neocons want to shut that down. All right. That's what I mean. They're myopic. They only look at that. We have to hurt Russia. Okay, you're now going to completely cut off Europe, increase their energy costs. This is the same stagflation that we went through in the 70s when OPEC
Mm-hmm.
hit.
Yep.
Everybody's got to get adjusted to much more expensive, big cars had to get smaller. I had to go buy a Ford Pinto just to make it to work because
Right.
your
Right.
gasoline was rationed and it was only odd or even.
Right.
You
I
got
remember all that.
$2. That
Yeah.
was it.
Yep.
I couldn't even get to work and back.
Right.
For 2 days. Come on.
Right.
So I mean, that's what Europe is going through.
Yes.
And so our computer definitely shows they are more at risk of a depression.
Yes.
The recessionary side that U.S. can have, the downside to um, Trump's policies here,
Mm-hmm.
uh, by putting in high tariffs on these other countries, etc. It's not the inflationary side; it's that you're reducing the velocity of money,
Mm-hmm.
the ability for them to buy.
Yep.
Okay, so if their economies are going into a downward spiral, and you just struck this great no tariff thing with Europe, what good is it going to do if they're not buying?
Well, the in the short term, what it amounts to is it's going to what we've seen, which is the rollover of the euro, right? That the
Yes.
euro at this point, so in the negotiation portion of this trade balancing scenario that Trump is now enforced or is now put on them, he double whammied them. He weakened the dollar and then put protection and then put tariffs on. So now you've got a stronger euro than now it's classic. Now you've got strong euro plus tariffs. Now German exports are 30% more expensive than they were before. So now the euro has to weaken and the dollar has to rise, which is what we're starting to see.
Right.
But what but that also is then going to put significant pressure, upward pressure on European bond yields and force Lagarde out of her yield curve control strategy, or she has to default on the debt and change the currency, which is what she's planning on doing. See, reaction, but that's what they're going to have to do if they want to, and that's why they want to spend and that's why they're going to spend all this money in deficit spend. But they have to jettison the current debt load. Now, the interesting part about this, and this is why I watch the German U.S. spread all the time because one safe haven asset for the world, the safe haven asset for Europe. I watch that spread carefully to see how it's getting managed, and it's starting to roll over at the same time as the euro is rolling over. So now we're looking at the market beginning to really finally price in to some extent a kind of bond vigilante situation on the ECB and the Bundesbank. So now when I look at that, and then someone pointed out to me the other day, have you looked at the Italian bond? The spread between Italian and German debt is down to 75 basis points, down from like 300 basis points a couple of years ago. So it's almost like the market is choosing Italy to be the new safe haven asset of Europe. And it also
Is Italy
portends to me
not
that Italy
interested?
might be the first country to break from the European Union.
I do a lot of podcasts in Italy. They're fed up, but um,
Right.
it's also because they're questioning whether going to war with Russia is even,
Right.
practical.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
because Maloney's also the only one that ever came to the United States when Trump was inaugurated.
Mm-hmm.
She was the only European leader that came. So
Yes.
I mean, it's clearly, I think it's do or die for Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They're pushing with the CBDCs mainly because uh, that's capital controls for them.
Yes. Yes.
They're scared to death of money fleeing. You just had Spain put in you can't take more than 3,000 out of your account without government permission.
Yep.
Um, you know, just look at the charts from World War One. They shut down all the stock markets, so you couldn't sell anything.
Right.
Uh, this seems to be coming.
Right.
I've warned, our institutional clients over there. That's why they started moving gold to New York and
Mm-hmm.
Singapore, etc. Because when that first bullet is shot, you're not getting anything out. I'm just warning you. This
Right.
is what they've done every time.
Yes.
So it's most of the Europeans I know. This is why Bitcoin's doing okay.
Yes.
They use it for money laundering.
Yeah. Of course. Of course.
They can buy Bitcoin there, sell it in the United States, and they got the money out.
Yes.
Didn't go through a bank wire or something like that. Canadians are using it for that reason. I
Yes.
mean,
No.
it's
I've called
not
Bitcoin
pure wealth or something.
I've called Bitcoin the bearer bond of the 21st century.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
basically it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a store of wealth. And you got these crypto people. Oh, these stable coins. That proves it's all. No, it doesn't. You don't even
Yeah.
know what the hell is going
Right.
on. Um,
We are a long way. We're a long way from Bitcoin becoming that. I caution Bitcoiners a little. I like Bitcoin. You and I are on different side on different sides on this, and that's fine. But I caution Bitcoiners all the time, and I tell them like, you have never watched Bitcoin operate in a world where the central banks are trying to defend themselves and where the governments are actually trying to defend their currencies. Previously, Bitcoin was birthed during the years of QE and zero bound interest rates when everybody was trying to destroy their currencies for whatever reason to create a great reset of the monetary system. And Bitcoin's, performed that initial role very admirably. I mean, very, very admirably. Whether or not it's, going to be able to perform the next role, you need to watch that carefully. You can't just say, oh, it's going to win because math. Like, that's nice, Spurg boy. It doesn't work that way. Like, you can Spurg
yeah,
out
no,
about the math all you want. It doesn't work that way.
living in
So,
Florida when there's a hurricane and the power grid goes down, not
right,
even a credit card works.
right. That's when you hope you have some junk silver and some canned sardines and toilet paper
Yeah,
and
I mean, if you want gas, fine,
yeah,
okay.
right, right.
That's about it. If you don't have cash, you're not getting
Right.
milk,
Right.
nothing.
Right. Yeah. It is. I caution everybody. And I say, well, and this is another thing I think we need to discuss because what we're laying out here, I think you and I agree, is that the Europeans are the most vulnerable to a sovereign debt crisis because of all the things we just talked about.
Yes.
Which is part of the reason why, of course, they either need to go to war or at least have a permanent casus belli that will allow them to inflate and change the currency out, either one way or the other, right? So now the big question is, in that environment, what does where do I'm sorry, I actually had I had the question and then it just I lost it. It happens, like the brain just moves in the wrong direction. But we can see that we think there's a sovereign debt crisis coming in Europe, and we know that there's going to be a capital flight. And what form is that going to take? And what do you? Oh, it's about deflation. The question I now have is, if we have the kind of sovereign debt crisis that we're talking about in Europe, and then potentially spreading to emerging markets and whatnot, are we looking at the deflationary scenario or the inflationary scenario? They're two sides of the same coin, right? The question then is, are you looking at a 90% haircut in the stock market, or are you looking at, what kind of global stagflation while we print money effectively to keep asset prices relatively stable and then hope to, grow through it in the, and this is where this is why I think Europe is fighting Donald Trump, and why they want to provoke a war between the United States and Russia and or China, is because they can see that if Russia, China, and the United States carve the world up, there's no seat for them at the table. And then they can agree to effectively, carve the world up into spheres of influence and effectively stabilize asset prices and try and grow through it over the course of the next, 5, 10, 15 years. That is the scenario I think is the most likely one, barring, global war.
What I've actually heard from inside sources from France, they call Macron the petite Napoleon. He really seems to think, maybe it's out of desperation, but they keep telling themselves that Russia's weak, Russia is going to collapse, all this other stuff. And they really think that they can conquer Russia and take the 75 trillion in natural resources. Europe will then rise again like the Roman Empire and rule the world. I think it's delusional, but this is why Macron was saying send in troops to Ukraine. And when Trump was not going to back Europe, he's offering nuclear weapons to Germany and saying their nukes will provide the umbrella. We don't need the United States to protect Europe from Russia. This is all delusional, but this is actually what he's thinking, all right, and saying. Maybe they're all just sniffing cocaine on the train together or something. I don't know.
I agree with you. I think they are delusional, but I also think they're desperate. And
yes, desperate. Look, when they formed the euro, they came to me, and I sat down and said, "This is how we create a currency." And it was Herman Kohl who intervened, because he said he wouldn't allow the German people to vote, because he said before he died that he would have lost 7-3. So his demand was to take Germany into the euro, all right, but there couldn't be any debt consolidation, because he knew the Germans would be upset if they were, they would view it as bailing out debt from Greece or something like that.
Right.
And so I told him, I said, this is not going to survive. I said, United States, fine, we have a single currency, but 50 states, they all pay different rates according to their credit rating.
Right.
I said, that's what Europe's going to come, because they were selling it, we'll all pay the same interest rate, blah, 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 all this. It was all lies. All right. And I was told flat out, right, they said, we just have to get the euro in. We'll worry about the debt later. So it's not that they viewed what I warned them was wrong. I said, this is not going to survive. They knew it. All right. So, and you saw it when Greece got in trouble in 2010.
Yep.
The traders immediately say, oh, we made a lot of money. Who's next? All right. This is the problem for the euro. You get one country that is in trouble.
Yep.
All right. And it cracks, it becomes a contagion for all of them.
Yep.
And as you're saying, you've just been looking at the spreads of the bonds to other countries. Germany used to be the bulwark of the EU. Now they're going to deficit spending to build for war.
Yep.
Uh, it, all the sanctions, the climate change, and the COVID shrunk their economy, and they're 25% of the EU. So I mean, it's they don't
And
have a prayer in heaven.
right.
It's
And moreover, I think that statement to you about we got to get the euro in and we'll worry about the debt later was because they believed they had political and financial control over the United States that would allow them that they would never have to worry about the United States turning against them on this, that they had control of the Fed, they had control of our Congress, probably as a downstream effect of Epstein and all these other operations that they were running. And they used that, and then that was what they were thinking. It just makes perfect sense to me. And that's why they helped install Obama and then keep him in office, and then even get rid of Trump during COVID. And after COVID, get rid of Trump, put Biden in, and try and keep this going. And then Trump comes back and is like, "Look, we're done." Like, as the same argument that they made about Bitcoin, saying, "Look, Bitcoin rose because the central banks weren't defending their currencies." The euro established itself because the United States was literally trying to trash the dollar, both from a monetary perspective and a fiscal perspective. Now the United States has turned the corner and said, we're cleaning up the fiscal side of the equation. We're going to clean up the swamp in Washington. We're going to deregulate. We're going to stop doing all this tax normalization through the OECD and WTO rules and, the Paris Climate Accord and all this crap. Lee Zeldin comes out the other day and trashes the whole assessment that greenhouse gases are a material threat or whatever the hell it is. That thing destroys like half of the regulations in the. They want to get rid of half of the regulations in the CFR. Martin, I was sort of thinking about Doge and deploying an AI to literally cut the CFR in half, the Code of Federal Regulations. The United States defends itself. There's no way Europe can. There's no way the Europe can survive.
No, look, I can tell you back in '85 in the Plaza Accord, because I've been called into all that stuff. That's when the idea was floated to create the euro.
Correct.
Because the dollar went up so high, the pound fell to 103 in '85, and so the whole idea was that if Europe band together, then that would be an alternative to the dollar per se. And because this was all, that's why I wrote the letter to Reagan and everything back then, because their view, Americans always want lower dollar so they can sell more widgets overseas. And so that's what the Plaza Accord said. We're going to lower the dollar by 40%. The '87 crash came after the Louvre Accord. And they met again in Paris. And they said, okay, fine, that's it. The dollar went down enough because everybody was screaming. When the dollar continued to go lower, the crash came because everybody said, oh, shit, the central banks can't control it.
Right.
And then the rumors were that the dollar would fall another 40%. So the Japanese start dumping everything. That's what the '87 crash. And you can look at the '87 Brady report. When I got called into that, I at least got them. It was Jack Schwager who was at Payne at the time, I think. And I didn't want to get involved after my experience in '85. Sure. And they were blaming computer trading. And Jack called me. He says, Marty, if you don't do this, they're going to come take our computers. I said, all right. So I agreed. I at least got them. My biggest accomplishment, if you read the end of the report, they said they didn't blame anybody in the financial industry. It wasn't fixed, fingers or insider trading, all that bullshit. at the end, it said, we think foreign exchange had something to do with it. That's it. All right. They didn't blame G5. I mean, that was my biggest accomplishment to get
Wow.
them not to do anything to
Right.
everybody because we had nothing to do with it.
Right. Of course not.
But
But that's that is that's an amazing statement. Oh, foreign exchange has something to do with it. That's like it's like saying the
97,
universe had something to do with it. Like it's
look,
it's a nonsensical statement.
97, I wrote to Rubin because he was starting the same shit, lower dollar for trade, all the rest of the stuff.
Right.
I wrote to him. I said, look, all right, I was the one called in for the 87 crash. What you're doing here, you're going to cause a crash.
Right.
I get a response back, oh, well, we're not really trying to do that, whatever. A few weeks later, that's the 1997 Asian currency crisis. I mean,
right.
I get frustrated from the standpoint that I get called into these things and it's always the same stupid mistake.
Right.
And my conclusion is that an individual can learn from his personal mistakes in life, so we don't do it again.
Exactly.
All right? But government is not, because they keep changing administrations. And I've never seen a single investigation to date where somebody comes up with some solution. I've never heard the question, has anybody tried this before? Did it work?
Right.
Never.
Of course not.
They go, oh, that's a good idea. So I wonder, I understand Trump with the tariff stuff, saying, well, the country used to be funded by tariffs. That's true in the 19th century, but it's also before socialism, Social Security, and all this other kind of shit.
Mm-hmm.
So the government was very small,
Right.
not gigantic.
Right. Oh, he's got a big task ahead of him. He's got to shrink the federal government.
Tariffs are not going to fund the government. This was all before income tax. All right, which didn't come in until 1913. All right, so it's and then we have this stable coins thing. What my question, I would like to find out who proposed this. Mm-hmm. Did they also look at history and say, oh, that's how they did it, so let's use stable coins? Or is this, oh, this is a good idea, and they came up with it all by themselves again? You know what I mean?
No, I see that. And I hope that they understand that it is greenbacks. And I hope they understand that. And
I just don't know. I mean,
I don't know. I mean, what I see from this whole, what I see from this whole like thing is that where this is dollar, the potential is interesting. We're going to end on this because when I get done with this one in a couple of minutes, in a couple of hours, I'm going to sit down and chat with Caitlin Long, who's prominent Bitcoiner and thinker on this in this space about the proliferation of the dollar into non-traditional markets because of what stablecoins can and cannot do. So that's going to be the next part of this story. So the other day I had I have a whole series of people that I curated this particular month for the podcast on purpose because I wanted to I'm going to tell this part of the story, then we're going to tell this part of the story, then we're going to tell that part of the story, and then we're going to see where we wind up. And I had Vince Lanci on the other day, and we chatted about the potential for what these stable coins can do. I had you on today because I want to talk about the geopolitics and how that and the history on all of this. And I'm really happy that you brought up the greenback scenario. It's good analysis. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, in that conversation I had with Dexter White last night, we were talking about these very things. He said, greenbacks are coming back, baby. That's literally what he said to me. And I'm like, eat the greenback. We were kind of gloating a little bit, but fair enough. So this is, I think, where we go next. And this is all I want to point out is that this is an inflection point. I don't know how it's going to turn out, right? It could turn out badly, as always, right? Or it could be the beginning of a turn into a different environment. We'll we'll see. I personally, I just want to see the era of central bank dominating currencies. I want to see them. I want to see that end. And this goes back to things that Jim Rickards used to talk about maybe 10, 15 years ago, that when the next crash comes, it'll be the central banks that go broke. First, we had the commercial banks go broke in 2008, and the central banks bailed out the world. Then the next one would be the central banks go broke, and then who's going to bail out the central banks?
Well, the problem is that structure of the Fed is substantially different than the ECB.
Exactly. Yes.
The ECB has the potential to go bust.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely.
The Fed does not.
Yes.
So it's a little bit different. Even the Fed, there was a big coup that they staged against the government in 1951 when they were told to do QE to fund the Korean War, and they said, no, we've had enough.
Right.
And they refused to follow the White House. That even made the front pages of so they are independent.
Yes.
In that sense. Trump wants Powell to lower rates. Screw you. No, I'm not doing
right.
it.
But again, as I pointed out, Powell not lowering rates is actually helping to give Trump negotiation leverage in his trade deals, because it's forced this repatriation trade in this uncertainty, right? And it's dried up, flows in the Eurodollar markets, and we're watching. That's what drove the euro to $1.18. So it gave Trump the leverage he needed to cut this.
He knows war is coming.
Right.
I'm pretty sure they read all our stuff. All right. But and if war is coming in Europe, I think this is in part why he's kept rates. Our computer says you're not going to see a change in rates till September.
Right.
But because the capital flows have been coming here as the euro is going down. If you're talking about capital controls coming in Europe, you better get your money the hell out. So that flow is coming to the U.S. And I still get 2-3 calls a week. You want to sell your house? I don't think that's happening in Chicago.
No.
So it's. I think the capital that's coming, and I talk to realtors here, and they say houses 1 to 5 million area, people are just paying cash. So they're not even borrowing. They're not even doing mortgages. So it's people parking money. And it's substantially different if a foreigner comes in versus you and I.
Yep.
If you got a house, I buy it for $1 million. Okay, the $1 million went from my pocket to your pocket. Domestic money supply didn't change.
Exactly.
But if I'm from London and I buy that, and here's $1 million, I'm now bringing cash into the country. Now the money supply just increased, and the Fed's got nothing to do with it.
That's right. That's right.
So there's so many more complicated aspects to this whole money supply, the velocity of money, where is it coming from? All of this is very, very complicated and critical.
It is.
And, I knew Milton Friedman. We had interesting conversations about this because he was like, the Fed didn't monetize. I said, yes. I said, but the Fed was concerned that with all of Europe defaulting, that the dollar, if he monetized, that the dollar would crash. And the dollar was going up instead because of all the money was coming here.
Right. Exactly.
So it was a real conundrum. And we're in that same situation right now.
Yeah.
So the crazier it gets in Asia, Middle East, Europe, the capital will seek a safe haven here.
Yeah.
That puts the bid to the dollar. You're seeing the euro go down. That undermines Trump's idea of a lower dollar to sell more widgets. You're not going to be able to sell widgets if the rest of the world is going down to begin with.
Mhm. Well, they, what
Um,
I think what Trump realizes is not that he wants to turn the U.S. in the short term into a major exporter. I think it's more about trying to get the money to come back in and put Americans to work rebuilding the country and
yes, yes.
get the internal, and then after that get the internal flow, as you just pointed out, get that moving properly, in order to stabilize the situation while there's in the interim, and then tariffs can go away if they need to at that point, or they can stay relatively low or whatever, or they can be renegotiated. And that's, um, I think that's more the plan than anything else. That's the way he's been selling it, and I don't think he's delusional about that. I really don't.
Now,
Um,
the other aspect is that people don't understand is that there's um, regulation as well.
yes.
It's not tariffs. So they put in quality control.
Mhm.
Oh, if you fed your cow with something that we don't approve, you can't import that milk.
I know.
Um,
The soft tariffs were, especially in the European Union, were insane.
oh
And
yeah, they do that all the time. Um, it can't be called champagne unless it comes from France,
right, can't be
stuff like
called whiskey, can't be called bourbon if it doesn't come from Kentucky. It's the same thing.
right, all this stuff. It's so there are a lot of trade restrictions that aren't in the tariff pot.
Yeah,
Um, so Trump's got to deal with all of that, and
yeah,
so it's more than just tariffs. But
yeah. Agree.
I don't
Agree.
know. We will see. It's going to be interesting times, right?
I no, I agree. I think that the best way to look at this is that we are at an inflection point, and none of us really have a crystal ball. Well, maybe you do, but you know, but
It's not me. It's the computer. I've tried to defeat my own computer, and I lose every time. And the computer just basically says, "Look, we're going to war. It's got a panic cycle on war for next year, and on a yearly level, holy shit! I mean,
that's bad.
um,
That's bad.
it just and knowing the economics of Europe, I don't think they have a prayer in hell of doing this without war. Um,
And I
so
think
unfortunately, I think
and
that's
I'm
where
like
we're going.
and what I would say is if they do what they think they need to do, it's actually going to accelerate the process of them being finally liquidated. That's what
Yeah,
it's going to destroy the
I,
European.
I think that's the whole issue because they're trying to dictate to everybody else, and people just don't want it.
Yep, agreed.
Um,
Well, just
I know
how about we leave
somebody
it there?
was actually there at the second attempt for the Romanian elections.
Yeah,
Macron flew in to make sure they won.
I
Uh,
know, I know.
that's NATO building the biggest air base in Europe in
Yes,
Romania, so they can attack Russia. So
I
the
know,
people don't want it, but
I know, I know.
we will see. It's just getting to be a real mess.
It really is, and thank you for helping me work through some of the issues of the day, and I I I'm going to continue to hold out hope that we can, quote unquote, beat the computer, because I need to, and that's fine. And and if I can't, well, there's a reason why I'm building a house in Tennessee. Like I
Yeah,
so
look,
it is what it is.
it's
So
human nature is human nature, and I don't think that they're going to change. And if they're in trouble, they're going to choose war over reform.
the only hope that I really do have is that these people are so odious and so disgusting that their native populations won't fight for them.
Well, I
And
think that's it. That Europe breaks up, etc. But I think that first bullet's got to be shot
yes, yes,
before it people
before it
start
hits,
questioning what the hell's going on.
it's like violence in your head is different than violence that hits you in the face. I spent a lot of years inside a martial arts dojo, and it's a huge
Yeah,
difference. It's a huge difference thinking about, can you throw a punch, and doing forms and hitting boards, and then sparring and getting hit in the head, and you're going, whoa, that's fundamentally different. And
yeah,
as Mike Tyson always said, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. So um, we think
very true.
people need to get punched in the mouth in order to finally wake up. So Martin, thank you so much for your time and your expertise and all of it. I do appreciate it, and really do really glad that we finally were able to, you know, meet and
Well, it's always good to see you. So take care.
you take care, man. We'll talk soon. Bye bye.
All right.